It's Thursday afternoon, 5 p.m. in Central Europe, and we're back with our Space Cafè Summit by Dr. Gatti, Editor-in-Chief at SpaceWatch.Global, with her guests Sanjay Vijendran, Ed Tate, Sabine Pong-Gruber, and John Mankins. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback, and we will learn and improve from your feedback. I'm Elena, Event Coordinator at SpaceWatch.Global. SpaceWatch.Global is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keep our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. If you want to be part of the supporter team, it is just a click away from you on our website. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our daily and bi-weekly newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. The newest one features Melanie Strickland of Slingshot Aerospace about how to get order in low Earth orbit. We also have new episodes of Space Café Radio. The latest are with Major General Michel Friedling, sorry for that, commander of the French Space Command, and also with Xavier Passo, director of FRS, both during the PSSI security event in Prague. With Neil Booth, also we have another episode. He is the CEO of GomSpace and the episode was registered during the World Satellite Business Week. Don't miss them. Our fan shop is also open for you on our website, and it's a nice way for you to become a space watcher. And if you missed any of our previous talk, don't worry, we have an archive available on our webpage in the event section. And you can also find us on YouTube, of course. With that, my job is done, and I'd like to hand over to your host today. Emma, a te, over to you.
Thank you, Elena. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Thorsten. Thanks, Frank. Welcome. Thanks to everyone. Thank you for being here with us. Welcome to the first Space Café Summit of this autumn, which is going to be focused on the link between space and energy and economics. I decided to tackle this biblical and huge topic from a space and an economical perspective, because energy is probably one of the few topics together with food, together with water, that fundamentally involves everything. It involves money, it involves power, it involves geopolitics, conflict, and technology. So the starting point for me is not a single one of those points, but is more a view, a global view into which energy not only shapes our basic needs, but it shapes also our culture, our fundamental approach to our development towards the next step in civilization. In a sort of way, energy drives evolution. And whether you want to think about this sentence from a biological point of view or from an historical, cultural, human-centric point of view, it still stands. Energy drives evolution. And exactly like a car is not just a method of transport, but it's a way around which our cities are planned, energy is not only a means of survival. It has the power to shape up our civilization. So this is my starting point. So my global question is, in 100 years from now, are we gonna be a different society if we decide today to shift from an Earth resource-based energy, fossil fuels, to a sun-based resource? And if yes, how and what it takes to go there? And of course, last but not least, is this an intelligent, statistically sounding choice? Is this a good idea? Have scientists and experts considered the feedbacks, the downsides, all the negative aspects? Because every technological revolution brings with it surprises, and these surprises can move us forward or can bring a step backwards. So this is the question I'm going to ask today to our speakers. Allow me to introduce you to this outstanding panel of experts that has been so kindly agreed to join us today for the sake of general knowledge and scientific outreach. First, our guest is Sanjay Vijendran, ESA's lead for the Solaris proposal, which is a new ESA initiative to assess the credibility of space-based solar panels. Latest news about Solaris say that the project will be put forward for funding at the ESA Ministerial Council, which will take place just in a few weeks at the end of November, and has been getting a lot of attention, a lot of media attention, and lately also a mention last week at a committee meeting at the European Parliament. Sanjay, welcome. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for being with us. Second guest is Ed Tate, CTO of Virtus Solis. Ed has a master's from Stanford and a PhD from the University of Michigan in electrical engineering. He has 30 plus years of experience with transportation and energy systems development. His career started as an engineer on the General Motors EV1, which was General Motors' first commercial electric vehicle. He was a senior director at Dassault Systems before co-founding Virtus Solis with John Bucknell. Virtus Solis was funded to focus on commercially viable space-based solar power. So along with the long-distance wireless power transfer demonstration, this year Virtus Solis were among the winners of the Level 2 Stage 1 NASA VAT on the Moon Challenge, in which they designed a solution able to beam energy over a distance of 3 kilometers on the lunar surface. Ed, thank you for being here with us. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic, thank you. Third guest, Sabine Pongruber, CEO of OEME and our economy correspondent for the space business sector. Sabine has written several pieces about the space economy for us. She's an economist by training. She's based in Salzburg, and she's an energy industry veteran with 16 years in leadership roles at General Electric. She's the CEO and founder of SpaceWatch.Global, a consulting company where they build bridges between the energy industries and the space sector. And SpaceWatch is currently the only IAF non-space member. Sabine, welcome with us today. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thanks for being here. And last but not least, directly from California, we have John Mankins, who is the leading expert, the recognized leader in the field of space solar panel. John has been president more or less of everything. So John, I'm sorry, I had to shorten down your CV a little. So I'm going to give a summary of the several roles you had. Among the many, has been the president of the Artemis Innovation Management Solution LLC and Mankin Space Technology Incorporated, and a director of Solar Space Technologies Limited. He's the vice president of the Moon Village Association, who has been collaborating with us. We know the Moon Village Association very well, and is a dean and professor at the online Kepler Space Institute. John has been worked extensively for NASA JPL, held in numerous positions. He received the NASA Exceptional Technology Achievement Medal, and he chairs the Permanent Committee on Space Solar Power of the International Academy of Astronautics. John, congratulations for such a curriculum, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Emma, and it's a real pleasure to be here with everyone. And I was checking out the list of participants, and it's a pleasure to see so many old friends among the names.
Thank you. Yes, it's a fantastic panel, and I'm really curious now to dig and to pick your brain on everything. So let's get started with some basic general introductions. Sanjay, you have the honor to open the stage. Let's start with some basic concepts for those that don't come directly from the energy sector. What are the basic concepts of space-based solar panels? Can you help us to understand?
Sure. So space-based solar power is really an advanced form of solar power, which has these a unique set of characteristics, that it's continuous, clean solar power that's available to us 24/7, and it's available essentially equally to any country in the world. And uniquely, it can be transferred from one place to another very easily and quickly. Now, this combination of characteristics is what makes it special. And in order to achieve this type of solar power, we have to put our solar farm, our solar panels, up into high Earth orbit. So that's where space becomes a location for where to locate your solar park that achieves this wonderful set of characteristics that has a lot of potential to add alongside other terrestrial sources like solar power, wind, nuclear fission, and others, to add an additional source of energy to the mix that helps hopefully achieve net zero in the long term.
Obviously, like we are discussing about a huge project. Can you tell us a bit more about Solaris? What ESA is trying to do with Solaris?
Sure. So Solaris is a proposal for a new R&D program, research and development on space-based solar power, to help ESA and Europe understand the credibility of the concept to be used to provide substantial power to the terrestrial energy grid. So this is a concept that goes back a long way. It's been studied in the past by ESA and other agencies, and most studies have pointed in the past to the fact that this was likely technically feasible in the years to come, but the economic case was always very difficult to be made because of the high costs involved with space launch and the cost of space hardware production. Now, ESA has, in the last couple of years, and specifically this year, performed some cost-benefit studies to understand how the landscape has changed in terms of launch costs and other costs related, and as well as advancements in space technologies, to see whether the time for really going forward with space-based solar power to implement something like this in the next decade has come. And we believe that with doing a substantial R&D program, we'll be able to really understand the credibilities to allow us to make a decision in no more than 3 years' time on going forward with a full development program, or perhaps not if the information suggests that it's not a meaningful thing to do. So we really want to understand it better before we decide whether Europe should go ahead with a full development program, in the hope that this can then contribute to our clean energy future.
So how come ESA decided now that this is at least a good idea to try to experiment? Where is the good in this?
So what has changed in our cost-benefit studies that we performed this year, which we completed in the summer, and we've made available the full results from those studies, which are accessible to anyone online on our website, Solaris, esa.int/Solaris, basically point to the fact that using reference architectures of concepts that exist today, once you factor in the perspective for much lower launch costs that come from reusable launches, as well as the industrialization of space hardware production, like we're seeing with the constellations of satellites being put out for communications like Starlink and OneWeb, where large amounts of the same types of hardware being produced on factory production lines. When you factor the reduced costs that come from these new advancements into the designs of space-based solar power systems, that starts to make the business case close, such that you can imagine building these large structures in space, launching the many thousands of tons of hardware that need to be put into space for one of these big satellites, and producing enough energy that you can sell and basically cover the costs of the production of the satellite itself and make a profit. So that business case starts to look like it's closing now, and gives us some confidence that this is a good time to really look into it more deeply to understand if we should go forward or not.
So how big these solar panels, space fields have to be? I mean, how many solar panels you have to build in space to replace, let's say, one nuclear power plant or one coal power plant?
So in order to provide commercially valuable, relevant power levels to the grid, like is done with current power stations like coal or nuclear, we're talking about power levels of something like 100 megawatts up to a few gigawatts. So 100 megawatts could be equivalent to a reasonably sized solar park that we have on Earth, or 2 gigawatts for a nuclear power station. So this is the range that we are looking to see if a space-based solution could basically fit such an energy source into the grid. But whichever way you look at it, whether it's 100 megawatts or at the gigawatt scale, you're talking about having to have very large structures in orbit. So things that are in the hundreds of meters dimension on each side, up to kilometers in scale, in order to capture sufficient sunlight, because even though there's much more intense sunlight in orbit than you have on the Earth, it's still limited to 1.4 kilowatts per square meter. That's all the sun offers us. So if you're looking to collect gigawatts of power, you can't get around the fact that you have to have kilometers squared worth of solar arrays in orbit. And this is essentially what we do on the ground as well for very large solar farms. And we have to reproduce that in orbit, but in a way that we can control, we can assemble such a large structure in space, we can operate it successfully, and we can eventually even disassemble, recycle it at the end of its life, all that robotically in space over a period of 30 years. These are the big engineering challenges that we're faced with.
So, Ed, Sanjay was mentioning the reason why ESA decided to start to invest some time and money on Solaris. What's the private sector approach? What's the private sector business case behind this? Why Virtus Solis, for example, is investing in a project like this?
Well, I mean, first off, we're looking at this as introducing commercially viable space-based solar. And as Sanjay pointed out, there's a couple of trends that have come together. The biggest one has been the introduction of reusable rockets has dropped launch costs dramatically. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you were looking at tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram. We're looking at, in the near future, potentially in tens of dollars per kilogram. Completely changes the economics of putting something that's a fairly large structure in space. The second piece is, if you look at where we're heading right now, is the energy sources we have primarily, we're powered by fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are, quite obviously finite. But as we go to replace those with renewables, as we scale that out, we're bumping into more and more challenges. Renewables are generally not produced where people need to use it. Renewables are generally not produced when you actually need to take advantage of it. So as we get to a larger and larger penetration of terrestrial renewables, the problem we're going to run into is we have to spend more and more on transmission. We spend more and more on energy storage on the ground and more on converting the energy into different forms to try to make it usable. What's unique about space-based solar is it's the only solution right now that can provide renewable, clean, and firm energy into the grid. And it's possible and has the capability to scale up to work at a civilizational level. As we talk about doing this, it's, you start talking about solar parks. There's a great meme that's going around that kind of shows this is how much solar it would take to power the world. It's a little block somewhere in the middle of Africa. Well, that's great. And we can actually power the entire world doing the same thing in space using even a lot less land than that. So it's a very low impact. It's a very clean way to get us to the point that we can power civilization without the compromises we're otherwise going to need, and without the additional costs that are going to come up from transmission, storage, and the impact that demand management has. So we see it can be done, and we see it has massive benefits.
So, Ed, why space-based solar panels instead of traditional solar panels or like traditional renewables? Where is the difference?
Yeah, when I put a solar panel on the ground, at the very best, I'm going to get half a day's worth of energy out of it. And we call that capacity factor. So when you look at putting a solar park on the ground, the typical numbers are going to range up to about 30% for very good ones. So if I put a megawatt of solar on the ground, it's going to produce about 300 kilowatts. But that doesn't give the whole picture. If I look at, say, putting solar in Germany, there's some great data that they've made available that shows that, like, the capacity factor for solar parks in Germany can get as low as 1%. So you install a huge amount of solar, and you're either going to have to massively overbuild, you have to complement it with other sources, or you're going to end up reducing the amount of power that's available when you need it most in the middle of winter and times like that. So this is called like the seasonal variation that you'll get with some of the renewables. When we do it in space, we have access to solar energy 24/7. And the means that we're going to use to get it from space down to the ground isn't going to be affected significantly by weather. It's not affected by seasons. It's not affected by time of the day. When these solar panels are put in the high Earth orbit, they're never in the shadow of the Earth. So they're able to produce power 24/7. And that's another piece that comes into this, is because this stuff can be used so effectively. It has a huge capacity factor. The economics really work in your favor for paying back that investment in putting it up there.
So what is Virtus Solis focusing on? Are you focusing on actually the prototype of building the solar panel on space, or are you also focusing on how to bring the electricity down to Earth?
So there's a couple of technology swim lanes you have to work in. I mean, one of which is you've got to have what you're going to do in orbit, which includes both the design and the manufacturing and assembly. You've got wireless power transfer to get it down to Earth, and you've got the receiving system that you're going to be using on the ground. How are you going to get that power that you get down into the power grid and make it useful? The one swim lane we've been focusing on the most this year has been wireless power transfer. So we've demonstrated that we can work where our system is focused on using 10 gigahertz, which is a band that's not really used for much of anything else, but except weather radar, and it can see very clearly through the atmosphere, even under extreme circumstances. So we've been demonstrating that we can push the power at distances. We have a demo coming up at the end of this year, which is going to be looking at a long distance transfer. And, this is the first piece you have to solve. We've been simultaneously working on what we'll do for the ground, what we're going to do for orbit, and bringing all those pieces together over the next couple of years. We look at being able to put a demo up, a very long distance demo in the next year, and then an orbital demo following that.
So it's my understanding that it's going to be a beam rather than a laser, right?
Yes.
And
so
what's the difference and why?
Okay, so lasers have, lasers, obviously you can picture it, you can see it, you pick one up and you point it, it gets the energy pointed very concentrated. When we deal with bringing this kind of energy down to Earth, what you want to do is focus on something which is going to be safe, which is going to be realizable with the technology you've got now. Microwaves we're surrounded by devices which are transmitting microwaves. They're just a different kind of photon, a different kind of light. You can bring it in a form that's going to be safe, that's going to be efficient, and it's something which will have very little intrusion. When I start looking at doing, say, lasers or other mechanisms, there's different complications you'll have to solve. We think microwaves is going to be a much easier way to do it.
So who you think you're gonna sell your product to? Am I your potential customer, the single citizen? Am I gonna buy electricity from you? Or you is a different type of business?
Yeah, so most likely when Space Solar first starts producing power and bringing it to the ground, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. And that's just the nature of getting production volumes up. Like Sanjay mentioned, this is an industrialization thing. So the very first pieces that are introduced have got to pay back the R&D. But there's a lot of markets on Earth that have different costs for energy. So for example, if you're looking at getting energy in an island, you've generally got imported energy that's very expensive. There's other areas like extreme north that energy markets are very high. So an introduction, there's, if you can get about $135 a megawatt hour, is about a $50 billion market in energy that you can sell into. And as you drop that price, and that price will drop with higher volume manufacturing, with higher volume launches, better reusability and survivability of the rockets that are used to carry the goods up, all of those things will drop the prices down. And ultimately, you're looking at something where space-based solar could be the cheapest source of energy of any choice we have.
Sabine, let's pick up on this final statement by Ed. What are the odds? What is the economic? Can you picture for me an economical situation? Are we looking at a viable solution? Which are the challenges? Is it really, as Ed said, the best solution for a green and clean energy?
It is one solution. Renewable energy sources need to be combined in order to provide electricity for the increasing demand we are all facing, right? So solar power, space-based solar power is one solution, and I'm thinking one of the critical ones due to the vast amounts of energy that can be produced fairly quickly and 24/7. It will help us stabilize the grid networks when we have no sun in Europe, but then all the solar panels on the ground are not working. So this will definitely help us secure the energy production. When I look into the economics on this side, and I have to say I'm super critical, because every time if something sounds too be good to be true, I tend to look even more into depth and details. But I have to admit, I'm a big fan of space-based solar power, and I really think that's a path we should proceed. On the cost side, there are many estimations. Nobody has done it yet, so we don't know what the actual impact is. And in the UK Cassiopeia project estimates around 40.6 billion US dollar. ESA with Roland Berger is at 34.5 euro for execution, and Fraser estimates the also in cooperation with ESA estimates the pilot project to be at 13.3 billion. That is public information, and that only contains the in-space technology, as to my knowledge. What is missing is the energy infrastructure on the ground. The rectangulars, the distribution systems, the transmission lines, that could add a huge hurdle to make the energy from space adds just another additional cost if that's not thought of well in advance. I think when I read the studies, the technology is compared to solar and wind on and offshore and nuclear. I'm kind of missing a comparison to hydropower plants, because those are the at similar size, similar scale power producers. Sanjeev mentioned above 100 megawatt. 3,000 hydropower plants are installed currently. The gigawatt capacity increases in the next 10 years for another 477 gigawatt. And these hydropower plants are most of the time in proximity to people. So you have a reduced cost of transmission. I like, John did an analysis on the Hoover Dam and how the rectangles would work there. So I'm a big fan of also putting into the picture the hydropower plants.
So where do you see the major challenges? You say, I want to be critical towards this approach, which is correct, because of course, there are entities that have more interest in this, but let's try to be a bit critical. Where do you see the major challenges to move forward, to make this turn into a reality instead of a science fiction tale?
Well, obviously, there are a couple of technical challenges to overcome, right? We have the in-orbit manufacturing piece. We have the decision on the technology we're going to use on space-based solar power antennas and panels. I think on the partnership side, this will definitely need to be a private-public partnership. Challenge is that if you deal with multinationals like Shell, BP, they're already very big in their organization and decision making is slow. And then you add agencies that themselves have a huge organization in the background. That could cause some threats to the executional speed. And I think that's critical, because if you follow the Chinese playbook for space, they go for space dominance. And plus, we are 100% dependent on solar panels from China. So I think speed of execution is a critical piece of it. And once you solve all of this complexity, you also have the people on the ground. Ed mentioned it very neatly by saying, well, we are surrounded by microwaves already and nobody is worried. But I think the messaging to the public is critical in order to overcome hurdles like permits for on-ground receivers, licenses, regulations, definitely lobbying. It's not that easy that you can add 2 gigawatts of energy to any national grids. So this is an effort that definitely needs to be done in order to go from space to the ground distribution. So 2 paths forward. One is the space, the second is the execution, and this involves politics, people, and partnerships.
Are you aware of the traditional energy sector? I'm speaking about oil and gas, but also traditional electric sector, if is interested in getting involved in such type of projects?
I mean, Sanjay and the Solaris team demonstrated that the partnerships they have or established are with BP and Shell, for example, from the traditional, at least that's what they publicly announced. I'm pretty sure there are more than just the 2 conversations going on. Usually the oil and gas industry is producing our fuel for mechanical engines to convert it into electricity. So it would mean a new business model for them, going from drilling, getting the oil and gas out of the ground and distributing it to main centers for further production. I guess this is some sort of a challenge. Hydropower plants don't need, are not aware, let's say. Thermal and gas plants could be interested in just for building additional capacity or providing the ground. We are talking about sometimes power plants that have a space coverage of more than 6 square kilometers. So they could be a potential receivers. They also have the infrastructure in place. And then the offshore wind farms could utilize the beamed energy to avoid storage, the need of storage. We touched briefly on it that we have peak hours during our energy consumption. That's when we brush our teeth in the morning or come home and cook dinner. But there's no need at 11 a.m. Or in the afternoon for that much energy. So the energy industry is facing challenges to store energy. That's why you hear often the hydrogen boom now, because that's what they're trying to do, convert the excess energy that is not consumed when it's produced into storage. So I think this space-based solar power is overcoming many of the challenges. And to me, for grid stabilization and storage capacities and democratization of energy, this is a liable
way to go.
Good path to go.
So, John, you're gonna get I know that you worked on the financial aspects quite extensively. So I'm gonna ask you the traditional classical question: how much all this is gonna cost, even in a kind of order of magnitude?
So I think not too surprisingly, my numbers are a little different than the ones that have been discussed already. My approach is a little different also. So I am not in any way critical of the work that's been done either by the UK or by ESA over the last several years. I agree 100% with Sanjay in his observation about what has enabled the reconsideration of space solar power on a larger scale or on a broader basis. But I will just say, so from my perspective, and using the analysis that I've done on my concept, which is called SPS alpha, solar power satellite by means of arbitrarily large phased array. Is what I characterize as a hyper-modular approach, in which, for example, a 2,000 megawatt, 2 gigawatt delivery SPS alpha would have on board on the order of 1 million identical, relatively small modules, plus tens of thousands of other modules at a somewhat larger scale, plus some modules that are larger than that, but still hundreds of them. So when you do it in that way, and even the very first system is sort of the backbone of it, the main part of it is 1 million identical modules. I believe you can both develop quickly and you can achieve better cost economics with the first full-scale unit, because when you get to the first full-scale unit, you've already built a small one, and you've built a medium one, and you built a pretty big one, because you do it in what used to be called in business terms a stage gate. This is a long answer to your question. I apologize, but I want to explain why my answer is the answer that it is. So from my perspective, I think that if you can make a truly stupendously huge object, a solar power satellite, out of 1 million small pieces, and they're all mass produced, that and I'll give you my evidence. So the Starlink that Sanjay mentioned is already at less than $1,000 per kilogram, and they've only made 4,000 of them. So I'm going to make 1 million, and I think we can get to on the order of $10 to $12 billion and 10 years to the first solar power satellite, and that the cost per kilowatt hour expected, sort of the overnight cost, will be on the order of 5 to 10 US cents per kilowatt hour, i.e. highly competitive with other energy solutions that are available. Now, that's not the cost from the first unit, because as I said, you got the small one, you got the medium one, you got the first practical one. So you've gone through all these iterations already, but for the first full scale one on the order of 2,000 megawatts, like less than 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and with all the other features that Sanjay mentioned.
So if you have to, so Ed was mentioning before that in his opinion, one of the key elements that made this possible, will make this possible, is the rocket launches, the fact that the prices go lower down. Is there another key element that is going to make this viable, some progress in the technology?
So if you look at the analysis, there's never been a dispute among anybody who looks at this that it's technically feasible. All the issues have always involved, is it economically viable? So there's mass production of space hardware in factories, not in surgical clean rooms. There's the low-cost boosters, which are now being developed by a half a dozen different players, both companies and countries. The other one, which was the big driver of the cost of developing and deploying solar power satellites in the old style, the 1970s style, was the requirement for a stupendous in-space infrastructure. Multiple space stations, hundreds of astronauts, factories the size of a Borg ship in Star Trek: The Next Generation, countless robots, all dedicated to nothing other than building solar power satellites. This is the sort of the economic foundation of the vision of big space colonies from the 1970s. It's building solar power satellites for Earth, but it also required $400 billion of upfront investment, not counting operations and maintenance. And anyway, so none of that is necessary today. The advances of the last 40 years in robotics, in electronics, the efficiency of PV cells from 10% in 1977 to 30% and on the way to 40% today. We have millions of robots operating in people's homes these days. They're called Roombas, and other social bots are coming very shortly. So all of those advances eliminate the requirement for hundreds of billions of dollars of in-space infrastructure in order to build these exceptionally large platforms out of innumerable small pieces. They can self-assemble the way that bees self-assemble a beehive. And so that's to me, those are the big four, if you will: the low-cost launch, the mass production, higher efficiency among all these critical devices, and the revolution in robotics and autonomy.
So last question before we moved to a more general discussion, US versus Europe. We are seeing, with Sanjay explain us how Europe and ESA started to finally invest in this project or be very interested in this. Is the same happening in the US? Is this something that is getting some momentum?
So there is continuing to be interest, but I would say that the fact of the matter is that in the US, we have the legacy of 1980, when all the work on space solar power was canceled, because using those technologies, using those launchers, using those huge in-space infrastructures, the cost of the first kilowatt hour of space solar power was estimated to be, in today's dollars, like $1 trillion for the first kilowatt hour. Now, these days, $1 trillion isn't so much, but back then it was a lot of money. And so there is there continues to be a reflex among many people in the aerospace industry to not even talk about space solar power, because they remember learning from engineers who were their mentors and their teachers that space solar power is a bad idea. It will kill your career. Don't go near it. You can't touch it. So I actually think in Europe, where there are only a few people who have been tainted by this allergic reaction,
so
I think there's a better chance in Europe to actually make some progress. In the US, there's interest, but mostly on the DoD side, the defense side, and a little bit of research. But it's very hard to get past the fear of flying.
I see. I'm gonna ask a question to everyone before moving to the Q&A, because for sure there's gonna be so many questions from the public. Is about safety concerns and bringing the public opinion on board. So considering all the problems that we had in the past with misinformation, lack of scientific information, Facebook miseducation, jokes about flying birds, the 5 anti-G campaigns that I still remember was running wild during COVID, I think is really important that the experts state the level of security and safety that there is behind this project and explain how to bring the public opinion on board. It will be interesting to see if there is a EU versus US perspective. Sanjay, let's start with you. How are you planning to be sure to transmit the correct information to the public, and is it safe?
Sure. So definitely safety is paramount in thinking about how to go about and do this. And the good thing is that the people who have been looking at designs of space-based solar power over the last few decades have been building into the most recent designs safety inherently in the design. So everything from the choice of the frequency they use to how the power will be beamed or switched off when it needs to be. All of these things are becoming already safety built-ins to the system, so that we can be reassured that if such a thing is built, that under all foreseeable scenarios, the risk of things going wrong is minimized. But certainly with any new technology that the public especially are not familiar with, there is a legitimate and natural concern about whether something is going to be used appropriately and be safe. And so we have to tackle this up front and be very open and early in our communications with the public as we do our research about what we do know and what we don't know, and what we are doing to figure out the answers to things that we don't know about. And this is what we plan to do alongside our technology development and technical activities in Solaris. We also are going to be doing research-based activities into the subject of safety so that we can understand the issue properly and give real data to show the public that the concerns are being addressed adequately.
So Ed, the question for you, how to convince the public that this is a good investment. We often speak about the importance of this project from an investor's point of view, but I think it's also important to explain what is in for the people. Like, do you have a 1-minute pitch in which you can explain what is in for me, the single citizen that has to pay the bills at the end of the month? Why we should invest on such a large scale project?
Well, at the end of the day, it should end up being cheaper power to you. So providing cheaper power that doesn't have environmental side effects to the utilities, putting it close to where the customers are means the utilities don't have to build out what they need, making it available all the time, meaning the utilities don't have to build storage. All of those things should mean that we're able to provide cheaper power to the individual user by making the source power that they get inherently better, clean, renewable, firm. And firm's a unique piece here because as we introduce these transient renewables, things that are on part of the day, things that are only available seasonally, you have to have power to run civilization 24/7, which means you got to spend a lot of money somewhere else. You're either going to have power plants that are on standby, and that's an expensive asset to have sitting around doing nothing most of the time. You've got to put transmission lines in, or you've got to put storage in. And all of those things have nothing to do with getting power to you as an individual customer. Space-based solar solves all of that.
Fantastic. Thank you for the pitch. I'm going to close down the debate, my question, because I can see there is a Q&A full of questions, so I don't want to steal more time. I'm going to pass the word to Elena, who is going to select the question from the audience. Thanks a lot. This is overwhelming us. It's a lot of questions. Elena, over to you.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, there are a lot of questions. I'll start with the one from Christophe that asks, how crucial do you see the need for Europe to its own independent reusable launchers, fleet and master in order to master its own pricing, so as not to depend on foreign providers for launching costs to be low, as it is required for this technology?
Okay, I think I'll take that one. Indeed, we do think that Europe should have its own capability to launch the hardware for building space-based solar power satellites. If we go ahead with such a program, the scale of this is huge. It'll require a huge number of launches, and that's a huge commercial market available that Europe should address with its own capabilities. And for this reason, ESA is planning to run some studies very soon on a European heavy lift, reusable, low-cost launch capability, something that we are not doing yet because we've not had a market that needed such a capability in Europe thus far. But space-based solar power provides such a market in the future. So we will be definitely assessing what the options are in Europe to do that. And if we go ahead with a full-scale development program for space-based solar power, we would similarly need to have a development program for such a launcher system in Europe as well.
Thank you. And I'll proceed to group some of the questions. There are some on space debris and threats in space to these kind of technology. So how to protect these panels from space debris, solar radiation, solar flares and the like? Won't these space solar power plants be required to be manned in order to perform repairs, for example?
No, I can jump in. first off, I think John Menkins, pointed out one of the things that enables space-based solar is that, we are going to be able to do this robotically. So that's one of the things that's dropped the cost, dropped the need for infrastructure. So right off the bat, these things will probably never have human hands touch them once they're launched. Okay, that takes care of that need for all of that type of infrastructure. When you start looking at debris management, I think this is going to be solved in a lot of different ways. There's mini paths, there's governmental paths, which are ready. Like right now, the US just put in restrictions on if you put something up, you got to make sure it's going to come down safely. There's many companies that are starting up right now that are coming up with debris mitigation solutions. Everything from literally collecting garbage and pulling it back down to blasting it out of the sky. So between regulations, management of this as an international commons, and I think different technologies that are in the workings right now that you're going to be able to handle it. The second thing is all these systems, even though they're very large, it's not like one P is going to hit it and the entire system turns off. Most of these are extremely distributed. If they take some damage, it's going to be just the wear and tear that happens with normal life. You put solar panels in the desert, a couple of them get busted. Wind and sand cause them to lose their efficiency. We've got similar mechanisms in space, and your power plant's still going to work, still going to deliver power.
John, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, please. So I just wanted to add that the way to plan for the repair and maintenance, to deal with micrometeorites, to deal with solar damage, to deal with it, all of those factors, is to put it into your economic models. Because once you establish the production lines for space solar power, the launch systems for space solar power, the in-space assembly, and so on, repairing and maintaining these platforms is going to be, can be quite straightforward. It depends on the design. One of the key factors in the design and the development of solar power satellites is to design them, to develop them for repair and maintenance. So every step has to take into account, how will I repair this piece when it's a full system? It can't be like the battery in a Volvo that's underneath the front seat or behind the wheel well, and I need 12 hours of hand touch labor to get at the battery. I mean, so sorry, I don't mean to pick on Volvo, but I have a Volvo and it cost a lot of money recently because, anyway, so if you plan for repair and maintenance and you fold it into your economic models, then it becomes a manageable issue. I personally use 3% per year. I assume that 3% per year of all the systems will fail for one reason or another and will need to be replaced. And that's just ongoing forever. Then I don't worry about it anymore.
Thank you. Next question is coming from Namrata, who's also going to be our guest next week, in the coming weeks. Namrata asks, how much will it cost to create a solar power satellite infrastructure to meet global demands of energy, say on a 20-year scale, from now to 2042? Any clear global financial estimates out there?
I can, if you don't mind me jumping in, I can give you a quick reference on hydropower plants, because I mentioned this earlier. Currently contributes to total energy production 16%, and has an installed base of 4,600 terawatt hours. So massive, and it's growing. So let's make it simple. Let's do the math. 5,000 installed for hydropower plants. That plus 16% of energy consumption, that's your total current energy demand, I would say. What it would translate into solar-based energy requirements, I don't know, but I'm not seeing this as an alternative and one source of energy only to meet the energy demand, and which will be increasing.
Thank you, Sabine. I'm going to move to the next question if nobody wants to add anything. This question comes from Matt. What's the theoretical energy loss through receipt with panels and then transmission back to Earth for use?
So just a quick number. So it depends a lot on the details of your design and the technologies that you would employ. So it's space solar power is like anything else. There are people who have Ford trucks, and there are people who have Maseratis. They're both automobiles, but they're very different in terms of their efficiencies. They're very different in terms of their performance and so on. So normally you use good high efficiency individual components, and you should be able to get from sunlight to electricity on the ground something like 13-14%. So that there are other systems that are worse. There are some theoretical systems that have yet to be proven that might be a little better, but it's a number like that. But honestly, you don't care. The number that you really care about is cost of energy. Cost is God.
Thank you. Next question comes from Luca that asks, can you describe what are the main engineering issues that need to be tackled in relation to building and maintaining a massive space solar infrastructure?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. I mean, the number one is going to be you're going to have wireless power transfer that's efficient. That's at the end of the day, we know how to put space solar panels up. We've had solar panels in space since 1958. We've been powering satellites for decades using it. So the collection of energy has got some enhancements to do to get the efficiency up, to make it work better. But that piece is, you can say, fundamentally solved. Building megastructures, that's a challenge. The biggest thing we have in space right now is the ISS station. We're talking about structures that are going to be potentially very thin, potentially very lightweight, but they're going to be much larger. So there's going to be the challenge of building that, managing that, keeping that where it's supposed to be in orbit. And then, wireless power transfer is going to be the major challenge of, orchestrating how you get all that energy down in a very focused means. The final piece is we think, it's going to be relatively solvable, is going to be is very straightforward, is going to be the RF receivers. They're not in production right now. The designs are relatively mature. They've been demonstrated at very high efficiencies, and converting or getting the manufacturing in place for that's going to be one final step. But as the beaming is worked out, the high volume production of RF receivers, we expect to progress very well.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question, coming from Mark. Could your energy also produce hydrofuels and to execute recycling of orbital debris or space mining?
Well, if the cost is low enough, syn fuels make a lot of sense. There's a whole host of other things. If you drop the price of energy, you've got desalination, you have syn fuels, you've got recycling with large energy inputs. All of these things become possible. So it really comes down to economics. Just like if we were to find some other energy source tomorrow, these things get turned on. Now, one unique thing from space solar power is going to be it does potentially open up an avenue for not only powering things on Earth, but powering things in orbit, powering things potentially on the moon. And as you build up this infrastructure, there's going to be the potential of supplementing high power loads in orbit, supplementing and potentially even building up completely different frameworks for putting observational and other sorts of businesses or other sorts of space businesses together.
Thank you. And I thank our audience. Oh, yeah, sure.
Just one other note about that is, and of course, once you have the infrastructure in place, it all comes down to marginal cost. Because space solar power is dispatchable, I can provide the power to where it's needed by the people who built it. Maybe it's Berlin, maybe it's Beijing, for most of the day. And then when they don't happen to need it, because they've got abundant sun, it's a nice, clear, sunny day, they've got all this ground solar, I can send the power to Indonesia, and it can be used to drive for a tiny fraction of the initial investment. I could add a receiver and add a carbon sequestration station. And so when I'm not, basically you can use the power from the solar power satellite 24/7, but you don't necessarily have to use it at the highest cost of electricity, highest market of electricity all the time. You can send it someplace else to make sure you're always using it quite immediately and very cost effectively, because the marginal cost is very manageable.
Thanks a lot. We are 1 minute from the end. I'm going to jump in to ask a question to everyone. It's a question that is close to my heart, is the environmental question. I've been trying to find some data. I've not been able to. I'm wondering if someone is doing some environmental assessment of the impact on our environment of extracting thousands of tons of raw materials to build the solar panels, like aluminum, copper, neodymium, lithium for the batteries, and an environmental assessment of what does it mean to build the kilometers of antennas offshore.
Maybe I can start with that. So it's recognized that terrestrial solar is a very resource-intensive industry with the mining that's required for all of the minerals. And so with space-based solar, depending on the technology choice, it would also similarly require potentially a large amount of resources. Now, the good thing with space-based solar is that because the energy intensity is higher, you're generally able to provide more energy for the same number of solar panels that you have in space. Compared to what you have on the ground, you can get more energy for the same number of panels. So it's essentially reducing the amount of minerals that you need for the energy to be produced. But in terms of the environmental cost of putting these satellites into orbit, of course, this is an important issue because we want to make sure that the entire life cycle costs in terms of carbon emissions and CO2 emissions to build the hardware, launch it, assemble it, operate it, and all of that is going to be low enough to make it worthwhile, because why are we trying to provide this clean energy? It's to be a positive impact on the climate. So we have some initial understandings from previous studies about the potential for space-based solar power to be a very clean energy and pay back the carbon in a short time. But one of the things that we will be doing when we do our technical studies is updating and refreshing the life cycle analysis for the future designs that we'll do in Europe to show that there is a clear net benefit compared to fossil fuels and other energy sources.
Thank you, Sanji. Anyone wants to add something?
Yes. So there is no one solution to overcome the environmental crisis that we are facing. It will be a combination, and I think it's important for everyone to be reminded that your contribution by consuming less electricity is already helping to reduce our carbon footprint and therefore improving the quality of life. So my final statement: consume less, save the planet through less consumption.
Thank you very much. Any other final statement from John and Ed?
No, I think this is a very important thing for us to move forward with. And I think this is now within reach. It's like a lot of other technical revolutions. Once the pieces are in place, there's a lot of action that's going to happen. And I think we're at the point now that's going to occur.
Yeah, I want to just say thank you to SpaceWatch.Global for organizing the panel. It's been a very good discussion, lots of great questions asked. It's a shame we didn't have an extra hour.
It's such a huge topic. You're right. So yeah. Correct, John. Thanks for pointing this out. We're going to try to transform this in a series, just to expand it and just keep talking about this. There are 15 questions we have no answer. We're going to try to take them by written, okay? Send them to the speakers and see if we can get the answer to you. You will get them in a couple of weeks. But we're gonna try to satisfy all the curiosities. Unfortunately, 1 hour is never enough. Before passing the mic to Elena, who will thank you. And closing down the session, I want to thank everyone, Ed, Sabine, Sanjay, John, for being here with us today, the public, the audience, those questions. Thank you very much. This is obviously the beginning of a discussion that has to carry on because it's so complex and it's so important. Thank you very much. Thank you all. And I would see you again, hopefully soon.
Thank you, Sabine.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Elena, over to you.
Thank you, Emma. Before we say goodbye, I just want to remind you of our upcoming events. So join our broadcast live from the CITC in Riyadh from the 8th to the 10th of November. And then on the 15th of November at 4 p.m. Central European Time, join us for a Space Café 33 minutes live from Bremen's Space Tech Expo. And on that note, if you go to Bremen, just let us know. Emma, Thorsten, and Frank will be there and very happy to meet you all Space Watchers. On the 23rd of November at 4 p.m. in Central Europe, we have our Space Café Black Ops by Dr. Emma Gatti, and her guest will be Dr. Namrata Goswami. As usual with our Black Ops, the talk will explore topics related with military, space, defense, and hybrid warfare. Quite hot topics, I'd say. And on the 24th of November, we have a double date, let's say, because at 9:30 a.m. here in Central Europe and 7:30 p.m. back in Australia, in Australian Eastern Time, we have our Space Café Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland. In this episode, he will welcome Olga Volinskaya and Lucien Rapp at the virtual version of the magnificent Café Le Vivant in Toulouse to discuss many legal issues arising from everyday space activities. And later on that same day, at 4 p.m. according to Central European Time, we have our Space Café Scotland by Angela Matisse on the sustainable space strategy for Scotland. Stay tuned for more details, and all events, as always, are going to be on Eventbrite for you to keep track of them. We would like to hear your feedback. We would love to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up for our daily or bi-weekly newsletters. And if you'd like to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today or help us in the supporter program. Mille grazie to Emma and her guests for the inspiring talk and for being our guests tonight. This evening. And thanks again to my entire team behind the scenes for doing that great job week by week again. I hope you will all stay safe and healthy, and thank you for joining us. I hope to see you in the next weeks in upcoming events. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Bye.